Hello, my name is John Peepo. I'm one of the pastors at Redeemer Fellowship Church in Monroe, Michigan, and it's my privilege to share with you some things about explaining postmodernism and understanding postmodernism, which is a philosophical. I don't know if it's correct to call it a movement, but an identifiable epistemological and narratival entity that has its roots deep in American culture and even parts of maybe a lot of European culture. I don't know if that made any sense to you, but I'm going to do my best to try to explain postmodernism to you. And just as a heads up, at the end of my presentation, I'm going to list some resources that I've drawn upon to explain postmodernism, which you might want to check out yourself. Also, I want you to know that my doctoral degree was from Northwestern University in philosophical theology, and it was on metaphor theory, philosophy of language, even some neurolinguistics, in the mix, and so on. It that's relevant to my presentation on postmodernism because postmodernism and then what's called progressive Christianity and progressivism in our culture, it's a battle for language. Language has always been something that's greatly interested me. And so I'm going to do my best to explain postmodernism, do a little bit of evaluation, but hopefully a lot of explanation so that you might understand it. Because you have to understand before you evaluate. And don't evaluate something if you don't understand it. It would be like going to the doctor and he doesn't evaluate you. He just gives you pills or assigns surgery for you without even looking at you, without even understanding your condition. So this is an exercise in understanding postmodernism, and it's not going to say it all. And postmodernism is a slippery thing in some ways that is hard to define. But I'm going to give it my best, and here we go. First, some terms that are important to understand in my presentation. And the first one is objective truth. An objective truth is a truth that's true for everyone, regardless of one's circumstances, situations, beliefs, and so on. For example, consider this statement. I am now speaking into a microphone. Now that statement is either true or false. And if it's false for everyone. And if it's true for everyone. It would be an objective truth, like 1 + 1 = 2, or the lights in this room are on. That's objectively true if the state of affairs of the lights being on obtains. So objective truth has to do with that. Second, self-contradictory statements. I'm putting this in here because I think at some significant points, postmodernism engages in contradicting itself, which to some postmodern theorists is no big deal. But to those of us who value reason and logic and clear thinking as best as we can, we're trying to avoid beliefs that contradict themselves. And so a statement that would be self-contradictory would be A is A, whatever A stands for, is not A. Or like the sentence I'm now speaking is false. That seems to be a self-contradictory statement, if not indeed a meaningless statement. So don't embrace a belief, my recommendation, if it's inherently self-contradictory. A third term is epistemology. This is a big philosophy word. It means theory of knowledge, the theory of how we know anything at all, or the theory of how knowledge is even possible. And postmodernism is making some big epistemological claims. And then finally, the term meta-narrative. A meta-narrative is a worldview that claims to encompass all reality and all human experience. And examples of meta-narratives are Marxism. Another one is Christianity. Another one is Islam. Another one is science. Postmodern thinkers are against meta-narratives. And I'll explain that as we go on. Now, there is a history that leads up to the current postmodern situation where postmodern beliefs have infiltrated the language of American culture and the beliefs of American culture. And the vast majority of people have no idea of any of this. They just are like themselves fish that swim in the water, but they don't self-reflect on thinking, hey, I'm in the water. What is this water? What is water at all? And or whatever. They just swim in that water. But there are historical precedents and certain figures that are massive in terms of slowly bringing in ideas that we now call postmodern ideas. That would be Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Rousseau, and more modern times, especially 20th century, Jean-Francois Lyotard, Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida. But one major figure is Immanuel Kant. Now, in terms of philosophers, if philosophers were to rate the 5 or 10 most influential philosophical texts in human history, there's no doubt that Kant's Critique of Pure Reason would be on there. And again, like if you're a philosophy major, or you do the kind of thing that I've done in philosophy and studies, and even in teaching, you slowly come to understand, at least it seems to be, writers like Kant and what it was they were saying. But Kant's work was revolutionary, and Kant's work undergirds a lot of postmodern thinking. Kant's fundamental question in his book, Critique of Pure Reason, is the relationship of reason to objective reality. Is reason capable of knowing reality, or is it not? And his answer was no. Kant was crystal clear about his answer here, that reality, he called it noumenal reality as opposed to phenomenal reality, which is the phenomena we experience in our mind when we look outwardly. Reality, noumenal reality, that is what things actually are, those things are forever closed off to human reason. And reason is limited to awareness of things and understanding of its own subjective products. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, the analogy I use is this. It would be like if when I was born, some evil person permanently sewed pink tinted contact lenses onto my eyes, and all my life I looked at the world through these pink tinted contact lenses. Well, it would be lying at the base of my experience would be like the way that I'm looking out at the world with this, and I'm seeing everything as pink tinted, but I'm not aware that what I'm seeing is pink tinted. It just is. Kant called those transcendental categories of reason, that is lying at the base of experience, that we look through, and it filters objective reality, so that We don't really see objective reality itself. What we see it is filtered or already interpreted. So Kant's critique of pure reason is massive in terms of postmodern thinking, and even in terms of this thing called progressive Christianity, which, by the way, I'm not critiquing necessarily progressive Christians at this point. That most of them, unless they're scholars, they're entirely unaware of this background. And ironically, I don't know, a year or two ago, I was discussing with a student Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, and they didn't like the book at all, but they didn't understand it. I was trying to get them to understand the thing, and yet they were subject to it in terms of their epistemology. That is, that's how they viewed their theory of knowledge, was deeply rooted in Kant's theory, but they critiqued Kant on its basis. It was just a ridiculous circular reasoning. So postmodernism, 4 major themes. Number 1, the blurring of boundaries. It's like everything is fluid. This exhibits anti-binary thinking. Number 2, the power of language. That is, the language we use is constructive of what we experience. Number 3, cultural relativism. That is, different cultures see things and know things differently than other cultures do, especially in areas of morality. Again, I'm not espousing this belief, now I'm explaining it. I'm not a cultural relativist, and I find it self-contradictory at significant points. Blurring of boundaries, power of language, cultural relativism, and the loss of the individual and the universal, which I'll explain later. So, two main postmodern principles. First, there's the postmodern knowledge principle. And this is a radical skepticism about whether objective knowledge of truth is obtainable, and it's a commitment to cultural or social constructivism. And then there's the postmodern political principle, which is a belief that society is formed of systems of power and hierarchies which decide what can be known and how. And behind that is Michel Foucault's famous, even infamous statement that power is knowledge. He reverses the knowledge is power common statement to power is knowledge. Systems of power and hierarchies determine knowledge. I don't know how that sounds to you. I'll explain a little more later. So, the postmodern theorist believes we cannot know objective truth. That is, no human truth provides an objective representation of reality. So, I've got my computer mouse here. I can make the statement, this is a mouse. It appears black on top and white on the bottom. It's got a little red light that's glowing, which indicates that it's on. As I make those statements, all those statements seem to me to be objectively true. But postmoderns think we can't get at objective truth because everything that we see, hear, touch, taste, and smell is filtered through our mind. And so if you thought that we couldn't have any objective truth about reality, then what are we left with? Well, one of the things we're left with is increased interest in narrative and storytelling. We can hear people's stories without even thinking of whether they're true or not. And there is also in this postmodern idea that we can't know objective truth. It's a rejection of what's called the correspondence theory of truth, which is the theory of truth, the epistemological theory that that a statement, which is a sentence that's either true or false, that a statement, if it successfully refers to an objective state of affairs, it's the belief that statements do objectively refer, or do successfully refer to objective states of affairs. But postmodernism rejects that. But science doesn't. And so at universities, in general, probably overwhelmingly, there will be more postmodern thinkers in the social sciences, sociology, anthropology, psychology, and in the humanities, literature, English, art, music. There'll be more postmodern thinkers in the humanities, but not in the sciences, because see, science still claims to be examining and evaluating and manipulating objective reality. And so postmodernism has not really gone big in science. But here again, you'll have one of those contradictions coming up with postmodern thinkers who or even progressive Christians who want to really adhere to this idea that it's really hard to get at objective truth. We need to be skeptical about that. And yet, out of the other side of their mouth, they talk about the discoveries of science, which is precisely the study of objective reality. I don't know if this makes sense to you, but listen to what Richard Dawkins says. And if you're familiar with Dawkins, Dawkins is a biologist, also probably the most well-known atheist in the last 30 years. And here's what Dawkins says about postmodernism. He says, "Is there a school of thought so empty, so vacuous, so pretentious, so wantonly obscurantist, so stupefyingly boring, that even a full frontal attack on it cannot be read without an exasperated yawn? Yes, it is called postmodernism." Scientists are not at the university level, research scientists, scholars. They believe when they're studying the coronavirus that their studies are corresponding to the coronavirus as it is, that they are studying objective reality, and they're not just telling different narratives like, well, tell me your experience with the coronavirus, or what do you think it is? Subjective ideas. In science, subjectivity is, I think, massively rejected as an epistemological tool. So for postmoderns, there's no objective truth. And then, so what is truth? It's socially constructed through language, and it's local to a particular culture. So it's like it's your truth, it's my truth, it's their truth, and so on. For the Hindus, there are 330 million gods. For Muslims, there's only one God. For Christians, there's one triune God. For Buddhism, there's no doctrine of God. But cultural relativism says truth is relative to different cultures. But there's a problem here. If truth is culturally relative, then the claims of postmodernism are culturally relative. And therefore, postmodernism is not objectively true. It's just someone's story or narrative. Again, one of the central themes of postmodernism is doubting any human truth, that any human truth provides an objective representation of reality, focusing on language and the way societies use language to create their own local realities, and therefore denying the universal. In this regard, Jacques Derrida wrote, "There is nothing outside the text. That is, we never really get behind or past language or texts. We never get beyond the realm of interpretation to some kind of kingdom of pure reading. We are never able to step out of our skins. So texts and language are not something we get through to, that we get through to a world without language or a state of nature where interpretation is not necessary. And so we have this deep skepticism that we can know anything objectively at all, which leaves us with subjectivity, but the narrative claims to be objectively true, the narrative of postmodernism. You see, if Derrida's claim is true that there's nothing outside the text, then it's difficult to see how we could difficult to understand how we could see clearly what Derrida himself is saying. That is, we could not get beyond Derrida's words to the real meaning of what Derrida is saying. And all we are left with is various interpretations which are influenced by whatever narrative we believe in. So the famous statement by the French philosopher Jean-François Lyotard is this: postmodernism is incredulity towards meta-narratives. Again, a meta-narrative is like a worldview that is intended to apply and interpret all of reality. Meta-narrative is a worldview claiming to encompass all reality and human experience. And examples of meta-narratives are science, Christianity, Marxism, Islam, and so on. But postmodernism doesn't believe in meta-narratives. All we have are narratives. And so this creates another problem, another self-contradiction. And here I'm appealing to the European philosopher Jürgen Habermas. I mean, if you listed the greatest philosophers, the greatest living philosophers today, Habermas is right there. He's probably tied for number one on almost any list you would look at. And Habermas claims that these postmodernists, including Nietzsche and Heidegger, Derrida, Foucault, and Lyotard, they commit a contradiction in their critiques of modernism because they use concepts and methods that modernism gives us. And so Habermas believes that postmodernism itself is a meta-narrative. So the idea that we can't believe in meta-narratives is itself a meta-narrative. Michel Foucault then said if there's no meta-narrative, if there's no metaphysical universal foundation, say for morality, that all we're left with is power. Now I'm paraphrasing the German philosopher Nietzsche here, because Nietzsche believed that there's no metaphysical basis for morality, and therefore all we're left with is power. And so Foucault said power is knowledge. And to say that power is knowledge is to make a claim about the power relations that stand behind institutions and ideals. Everything I believe is determined by power structures of my society. And so, wow, I mean, just keep that thought in mind, and the battle for language that's going on in our culture today, and the accusations that come forth of the microaggressions, like, oh, that you hurt me by saying you disagreed with me, or you hurt me by saying that I'm wrong, and so on. All this has its roots in postmodern thinking and the postmodern predecessors. Postmodernism is characterized politically by its intense focus on power as the guiding and structuring force of society, a focus which is codependent on the denial of objective knowledge. Again, if we can't have knowledge of objective reality, then all we're left with is subjective interpretation of an unknowable objective reality. And from that, then all we're left with is power relations, and jostling for position in social structures and cultural relativism and so on. So power decides what's factually correct. Power decides what's morally good. Power implies domination, which is bad, oppression, and the disruption of what is good. But you see that if everything I believe is determined by the power structures of my society, how can any of my beliefs have validity except relative to the standards of that society? If all beliefs are valid only relative to the power system from which they originate, then Foucault's relative claims themselves have at best only this restricted validity, that Foucault is writing out of the power structures of his society that he lives and breathes in. And that, I think, especially to scientists, but to philosophers who, like myself, who struggle with this, find that absurd and not something worthy of being entertained, not something worthy of being believed. You see, if you and I were subject to the power system that Foucault writes out of, then we would accept his position. We would nod our head. Yes. But if we're not subject to the same power regime, then his position is irrelevant to us, according to his own theory. I'm moving towards the end of this brief presentation in the attempt to explain postmodernism to you. It includes the loss of the self. Then we have the social construction of the concept of the self. That human identity, a person's identity, is constructed by many is constructed, not given to us. That's Christianity. That we are given a human nature and a selfhood and an identity. And in fact, every meta-narrative, you might be able to make the case, every meta-narrative gives a statement about, gives an epistemology of anthropology or a self-identity. Even science does. I mean, science only studies things that are physical, therefore humans are only physical and nothing more, without remainder. But in postmodernism, identity is constructed by many cultural forces, not given to a person by tradition. And we have moral relativism, where morality is not found, but it's made. It's not based on any tradition. It's not given by God. It's constructed by dialogue and choice. This is relativism in the sense of believing that all forms of morality are socially constructed cultural worldviews. But again, if someone doesn't embrace your worldview, which whatever your worldview is, there are plenty who don't embrace it, then on this theory you can't critique them. You can't say that they're morally wrong in what they do. It becomes very, very difficult because on moral relativism there are no objective moral values. Even the statement racism is wrong is itself a socially constructed worldview, that if you don't share that worldview, there's no rationality in accepting the idea that racism is evil. So according to postmodernist thinking, knowledge, truth, meaning, and morality are culturally constructed and relative products of individual cultures, none of which have the necessary tools or terms to evaluate other moral cultures. I mean, and at this point, we're left just to hear your story. So again, now, believe it or not, summing up, there's the postmodern epistemological or knowledge principle, which is we're really skeptical about whether we can get objective truth, whether it's obtainable. And so we're committed to cultural social constructivism, which is your truth, my truth, depending on the culture you live in, and so on. And then there's a postmodern political principle that society is formed of systems of power and hierarchies. And those systems of power and hierarchies decide what you can know and how you can know it. And so the four major themes of postmodernism, again, are blurring of boundaries because of no objective reality, the power of language, cultural relativism, and the loss of an enduring individual and the loss of universal truth. There's a suspicion of all the boundaries and categories that previous thinkers widely accepted as true. And the individual, like everything else, is just a product of powerful discourses and culturally constructed knowledge. And the concept of the universal is just another exercise in power knowledge, an attempt to enforce dominant discourses on everybody. But again, keep in mind that the postmodern position is itself, according to its own theory, an exercise in power knowledge and an attempt to enforce dominant discourses on people like me and maybe you. So here's some things I see postmodernism and progressive Christianity. And in terms of this progressive Christianity thing, it's been around for a long, long time. I mean, way before I was born. But in the 70s, I was studying progressive Christianity and in authors that were self-identifying in that regard, or being identified as progressive. And occasionally I hear someone called a progressive who says they're a progressive Christian, or if I talk with them, sometimes I say, man, you're really postmodern. You've really adopted postmodern thinking, haven't you? And then I'm curious to see if they really understand the roots of that. But postmodern themes in progressive Christianity there's a focus on personal narratives more than beliefs. There's skepticism regarding interpreting the Bible that I think is rooted in a general skepticism of knowing anything objective at all. There's a tendency towards universalism, the accepting of every person's narrative, because we don't have a universal principle that would under a standard under which everyone would fall. There's the blurring of boundaries, and that's the statement like when someone says, well, that's just your narrative, or that word fluid is used. I've heard that many, many times. There's a rejection of binaries, of true, false, right, wrong, male, female. Binaries are seen as oppressive power concepts. But for me, in the study of postmodernism and hearing some progressive Christianity, I hear that discussion as loaded with plenty of binaries themselves. There's a tendency towards moral subjectivism and relativism. Two more quotes and two book recommendations. First, I strongly recommend, if you're interested in this, and especially if you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, that you get Rod Dreher's book, Dreher, Live Not by Lies, a manual for Christian dissidents. But in that book, Dreher says, the therapeutic is the postmodern mode of existence. Not the quest for truth, but the therapeutic. His whole book fills that out. And then my personal book of the year last year, Truman's book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And Truman says this: ordinary Christians desperately need a more profound and holistic grasp of the modern and postmodern condition. It is the water in which we swim, the air that we breathe. There is no escaping it. But we can figure out how to live in it and through it without losing our faith. Yet, any proposed Christian solution to the crisis of modernity will fail if it does not address the core causes of the great forgetting. If you're still listening to this, in some ways I congratulate you. I hope this has been helpful. I know it can get abstract and so on, but I'm going to now at the end of this video list some resources that if you wanted to study postmodernism more, that you could turn to. Again, I thank you for joining me. I hope this day is going well for you. If you want to email me with a thought or a question, I welcome that. Blessings to all of you this day.